Hi, I'm Walter. I'm the Dutch mentor, also known as the Flight Path Pioneers. And welcome back to the 15-minute helicopter lesson, where I'm going to take a more practical approach to learning how the helicopter functions, flies for a beginning student, although it's certainly good for a rusty pilot that is getting ready for your biannual review. Today's topic is going to be talking about flight controls. That's the part that we all are very anxious about controlling, and as hopefully you got to do on your first orientation flight when an instructor took you out and gave you the controls while on straight level flight. Well, listen, some helicopters come with autopilots, but the vast majority of your training aircraft will not. So one thing is 100% sure, that you can never let go of your cyclic. The collective maybe a little bit, but you can never take your hands off the cyclic. And it's really good practice to always maintain control of the cyclic and the collective. So don't let go of these things. And let's learn a little bit more about them. The helicopter setup in the Robinson helicopter is what we call a T. It is a single control in the center between the two pilots, and then it has individual controls that you can manipulate from the right seat or the left seat, but it all goes through the center part of it. So when you maneuver the steering wheel, so to speak, high or low, it actually has no mechanical action that is translated up to the swash plate on top that rotates or tilts the rotor head itself. So just keep that in mind. That's a little bit different than if you go in a more advanced helicopter, or even other basic trainers that have a cyclic on both the left and the right side. It's unique. It certainly has some of the advantages because you don't need to climb over top of anything, and it is something that is certainly you get used to it very quickly, and very, very popular. That's the reason why Robinson has done well in the training industry. So the primary function of the cyclic is to tilt the rotor disc in the direction of desired flight. So literally, if you push it forward, it tilts forward. If you push it backward, it tilts backwards, left and right. And one thing is that when you sit in the aircraft, before you even start it up, you have to look and to see if the cyclic can be moved, what we call in a full range of motion, by taking off the tensioner and then rotating it in full motion. I want you to not only feel that there's no restrictions when you do this, but I also want you to look up to the main rotor, at least one of them that's in front of you, that you can see the mechanical actions that are taking place to some extent, right? Now, in combination with the collective, if you are using it at the same time to see if there's full range of motion there, you can see the movement of the blade, and that is something that is important. Just like we did in pre-flight, it might be really good from a learning perspective to sit on top of the aircraft, look at the swash plate and the pitch horns and the links, and have somebody else manipulate the collective, the swash plate up and down, or if you move the cyclic, how it then impacts the tilting of the rotor head itself in order to be able to go forward, backward, left, or right. It is something that you have to remember that these are mechanical functions, right? So directly from the center, vertical, goes into rods below the floorboard that have a direct input to the swash plate and how things are moved above. So although it's hydraulic assisted in the R44, it is not in the R22, and it makes it a little bit different, right? In the R44, we do practice flight without hydraulics, so you can actually feel how much muscle power it still takes in order to be able to control the cyclic and the collective for that matter. There are friction buttons on both the cyclic and the collective that are in place. Of course, during flight portion, you always you take the friction button, you turn it off, and you never turn it on back on until you're safely on the ground. The collective is found in the center for somebody who sits on the right side of the aircraft, and of course if you're sitting in the left seat, there's one on the left side there as well. So interesting enough, the difference between a helicopter and an airplane is that when you shift seats from the left side to the right side, that could be from once you've graduated as a private student, commercial student, you go to become a CFI, you get to sit in the left seat. And trust me, the side picture in the left seat and learning how to fly from there initially is really kind of like strange and very awkward. But the function, you're still holding the cyclic with your right hand and the collective with your left hand. Interesting, in airplane flying, that is not the case, right? Because you have in the center where you have your controls, when you go to the right seat, and it's directly opposite as a student to start training for your CFI, now you have to control the yoke with your right hand and all of the power settings with your left hand. So it's a different learning curve for sure. The primary function of the collective is to climb and descend, allow the helicopter to go up and to down. And it is simply done by raising the collective, which increases the pitch of the plate, the collective, all at once, and it allows to take more air in. It then results in lift. And lift is only created once we overcome the gravitational pull or the weight of the aircraft itself. And we're going to talk about aerodynamics and how that all works at a later time. This is just the mechanical portion of it to kind of understand. Again, really useful. Go sit on top of the aircraft and have somebody play with the collective so you can actually see the mechanical function on what takes place. Once you feel that and sense that, it all makes a whole lot more sense during flight itself. So the increase slows the rotor down, and because of that, more induced air, downward air, coming to the rotor disc. And we're going to talk about that, when you increase, the blade, the RPMs want to come down. Of course, we want that is being countered by an action that is within the collective itself. We'll go into that a little bit more. There's also a friction knob there that, again, we want to put the friction in play once we are back on the ground, so it stays in a horizontal position. Now, during flight, you could put that onto a little bit to help keep the collective in a stable, same setting during cruise, and level flight, especially if you need to take your hand off the collective in order to manipulate and set radio frequencies, or during IFR flight itself, that you have to do many different things during the flight. But again, most of them remain rather stable. Now, most. I've flown, at least 10 different R-44s, and they all act a little different, so don't take that for granted. Sometimes you put it in a power setting of 19 inches, and next thing you put your head down, it's back at 15 inches, right? There's a twist throttle that stays consistent, and we're going to talk about that next. So the correlator and the governor is something that we need to learn a little bit more about. That inside of the collective itself, at the far end, of course, there's a twist grip. Now, for all of you who ride motorcycles, you have to be very mindful, because in order to accelerate, you are going to hit the grip and twist. Interesting enough, in the helicopter, it is the opposite of that. If you were getting a little anxious and you think that RPM is, you're losing RPMs in the aircraft itself, and you would make that motorcycle grip, you would actually make it far worse, and actually can go into a rotor stall if your RPMs go below 80%. So be very, very mindful that, of course, the CFI should always have their hand on the throttle, that if the students, especially new students, have a motorcycle history, are going to manipulate it, that it could very easy go the wrong way. So we have to protect it from an overspeed, when somebody too aggressively twisted in the right direction, or losing RPM, and especially in flight, that's a big no-no. So again, we have to be mindful about that and train early on. Again, muscle memory is the key, and the way to do that is by sitting in the aircraft and making sure that we're not introducing fuel into the system itself, right? Because the mixture is out of it, so the valve is closed. You can actually practice that a little bit, right? So holding it, if you want to have your thumb comes up is on, thumb goes down, it goes off, right? We just need to learn to practice that on how that works. The other thing is that inside of it is a mechanical device that, as we are pulling power, or we're lifting the collective up, the correlator is going to automatically open up and increase power setting by just enough to meet the need of the helicopter at that point of time. You don't need to self-regulate that, right? That is done through the correlator inside of the collective itself. And of course, when you bring the collective down, the opposite takes place. Now, the governor is made in a way that it will maintain a constant RPM setting. The correlator will make minor changes. Even the governor, depending on winds and speeds and your how you're flying, will continue to make small changes which you don't need to do. And that can be switched on and off. There's a little switch on the end of the collective itself. You can turn it on. And you'll see when you start gripping the throttle, you bring it above 80%, it will then take it by itself all the way to where it needs to be in the green and keep it there. Because we can mechanically roll it off to check our low RPM light and horn. But as soon as we let go of it, as long as it's over 80%, it will automatically take us back to the right power setting at about 100, 102%. So that is really, really important to remember, that we have that. And again, guarding it at all times is the really, something you have to learn to do. So you cannot have a runaway train. And certainly you need to learn to not twist in the wrong direction in case there is an emergency itself. Again, we'll talk more about some of these controls as we'll learn about flying the helicopter, right? We're all still just on the ground over here trying things out. The next flight controls are the pedals. Again, the pedals are directly controlled to linkage below the aircraft, below the floorboard, in tubes that gives feedback to the tail rotor blades itself. And that is something that we have to, it's difficult to check when you're sitting in the aircraft because, there's no rear view mirror on it. Again, you might ask somebody else to do it, or what you could do is you go stand next to the aircraft with the door open and you push the left pedal all the way in, and you might be able to see how it is actually increasing the angle of attack of the blade on the tail rotor at that point of time, and vice versa. Now, the thing is that the left and the right pedals are not independent from each other. If you push the left forward, the right comes back, and vice versa, right? And practice that. Again, the golden rule, the key is to keep it in neutral position during startup of the engine itself. Why is that? Remember, we talked about the tail rotor is already offset by a degree to make sure it gives a little bit of anti-torque to prevent the nose from twisting. But if you have too much left or too much right as you start the engine, you could actually cause a spinning effect. And there's some interesting YouTube clips out there of people who did just like that. On that note, I actually had an incident one time when we did an auto hover exercise. We lowered the RPM setting during a hover at 8 feet above, which you have to learn to apply right pedal and elevate the collective in order to have a soft controlled landing. Once we talked about that and we started bringing power back into it, I still had too much right power and immediately had my nose wanted to change. And that is something you have to be mindful about. Sometimes small mistakes lead to long-term learning. Certainly that was my lesson. And 2 feet on the controls, 1 on each, is better than having 1 foot on both controls. Again, that is just sloppy work. How it works? Simple. Left pedal, left turn, right pedal, right turn. On the ground while you're sitting there, it doesn't do anything, right? It just helps keep your nose straight. In a hover, you can do left turn, right nose to the left, right turn to. Now, in order to turn to the left, which is considered the torque pedal, and the right is the anti-torque pedal, the left pedal requires more power than the right. Right? The nose wants to go to the right because the blades are spinning to the left. Right? That will easier than if you go have the torque pedal, the left one, that you go to it to try to go to the left itself. Right? So again, practicing it in flight itself, it helps you stay coordinated, and you can look at the ball and or look at the 2 little strains of wool that are on the window itself in order to be able to regulate that. All right, with that said, these are the flight controls. It is not that complicated on its surface, but how to coordinate all of those controls is going to be the tricky part and often leads to great frustration in the first 0 to 10 hours because we all want to learn to hover, but it's not that simple. All right, come back for the next 15-minute lesson that will be done on systems. And there are lots of little systems that work in a helicopter that we need to learn about and have a deeper understanding about. See you again for a helicopter in 15 minutes. Have a good day. Thank you.